start this morning. That's what the clock says right now. Good to see everybody here this morning. Before we begin our class, let's go to God in prayer. God, we're so thankful to you for the time that you have blessed us with today to assemble to this place and to study from your word. God, there's so many things that we can get from your word if we will but just study and look for them. They're right in front of us. Be with us as we study this morning, that you will give us the applications that we need, and may the things done here today be done in accordance with your will. In Christ's name, amen. We are on chapter 38 of Genesis this morning. Now, chapter 38 is a little bit of a strange thing in that last week you remember Joseph's brothers, 9 of them at least, decided that rather than kill him, they'd just sell him into slavery. Like, why not? It's not going to profit us anything if we kill him. We'll sell him. We'll get some money out of it. That's what they did. Sold him, and he was taken down to Egypt. Now today, there is going to be a little bit of a break from Joseph. And we're going to be talking about Judah. Now, it's been kind of debated back and forth a little bit about why put it here? Why not put it earlier? Well, it really wouldn't have made sense earlier, because from what we get apparently from in chapter 37, Judah was still single, working for his dad, and he was looking after his sheep and his flocks and so forth. So it really couldn't go before that. And beginning with chapter 39, we're going to be talking about Joseph quite a lot. So this really did make sense for the author of the book of Genesis to put it right here. And the other thing about the author of the book of Genesis is that he was divinely inspired. So my guess is that God had something to do with why this is right here where it is right now today. So, having said that, beginning with verse 1, it came to pass at that time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. And he married her and went into her. So she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name She conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan. She conceived yet again and bore a son, and called his name Shelah. He was at Chezib when she bore him. Now, when we talk about Judah, let's go back a chapter. Do you remember who was kind of the ringleader in this episode with Joseph, as far as wanting to do away with him? As most especially who was wanting to sell him into slavery. It was Judah, wasn't it? Judah was the one that said, "What will it profit us if we kill him? Let's sell him." I went back there because I want to pose this question. Do you think that might be bothering Judah? Is it possible Now the scripture doesn't say this. So I don't want you to misunderstand what we're doing. But is it possible that part of the reason for Judah leaving, maybe he was kind of being bothered some? Is that possible?
He actually saved his life by selling it.
That is true. That is true. Not usually the way we would think of you wanting to save somebody's life, but that is true. You got a point there. I think maybe he was a little bit disturbed. Maybe he didn't know he was, and then maybe too he was kind of wanting to branch out and do his own thing. Reuben was since he was the firstborn, he was kind of the one that was, I guess you could say, in charge. And because Jacob was not, we can look there and see that he was not. And maybe Judah was tired of living under his brother's thumb, under his brother's shadow. Regardless of whatever that was, we do know from the first part of chapter 38 that he left. Tony?
What I've been reading, and I agree with you, what you said to begin with, God in charge here. And some people think that it's because between 37 and 39,
Mm-hmm.
they needed to do something, God did, whatever, His Holy Spirit needed to show that there was some time went by
Mm-hmm.
between 37 and 39.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Because, I mean, we leave, let's see, what happened on Joseph?
the last part of the Joseph story is that they sold him in Egypt to Potiphar.
Okay, and then if this 38 was not in there,
Yep.
jump into the time that he was,
There's still going to be a little bit of time gap, won't there? Yeah. Well, I would say
time went by.
I would say that God did it right, didn't He?
Yeah, I
He
mean,
sure did. So I think this really is a good spot to put that, and it actually covers a pretty long period of time, but then at the same time it overlaps some, I think, with the events in 39. Because for Judah to leave, I mean, surely he didn't leave the same day that they sold Joseph. So I'm sure a little time elapsed.
as it all worked out, Judah was a pretty important person, I hope.
It was. And
Came through that lineage.
yeah, and we're going to see that in a little more detail in just a few minutes too. But there was quite a span of time that occurred in chapter 38. Judah left. Judah found him a wife, and she had young ones, and then they got raised up. So that was kind of a little span of time. But anyway, so at the point we are right now, there's 3 sons there, and they seem to have been born all in fairly rapid succession too, because in verse 6 now, where we've already run to the time where his firstborn is old enough to be married. Then Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord killed him. Some of the translations use the word evil. I like that word wicked better, because I don't think that just saying something was evil maybe did justice to what was doing. It was, if if you look at Bible history, it was very rare that God took somebody's life because they were wicked. He usually let them do what they were going to do, and we dealt with it later, or dealt with it at the other time. But there are certain instances, right here being one of them, where the individual was so wicked that God's like, you're done. And he took him. That's what Scripture says here. And it really kind of makes you look back, and we see how righteous Abraham was. And he passed that on to Isaac. I don't think there's anything to really indicate to me that he was not righteous. Maybe he wasn't quite the father that Abraham was, but. And then we move into the birth of Jacob and Esau. And those two boys didn't really seem to have quite they didn't seem to have the righteousness their granddaddy did they? Especially Esau. He would just run wild. So I think over a period of generations, look where we are right now. We go from the father of the faithful to a man whose son God took and killed because he was wicked. Just a few generations. I've often heard it said before, and there's a lot of truth to this. It was often said that the church is one generation away from apostasy. We must be on our guard, and I think that's a lesson that we can learn here, is that it's important, it's vital that we teach our children the ways of the Lord, so that we won't be looking at a situation like this. Now, that's not where this ended. And Judah said to Onan, "Go in to your brother's wife and marry her and raise up an heir to your brother." But Onan knew that the heir would not be his, and it came to pass that when he went in to his brother's wife, that he emitted on the ground, lest he should give her an heir. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord, therefore he killed him also. It seems that, and let me see here where I saw this here. Yep. Now that seems like kind of a strange thing for us today, but that was actually the law of the time was, and that actually kind of moved over into the law of Moses as well. That if the brother had died, then a brother goes in and raises up seed to that brother. There are several translations that translate this when in verse 9 and to whenever, and that would indicate that was occurred more than one time, that he was just using Tamar not to raise up seed, but just for his own pleasure. And perhaps the Bible doesn't say specifically what the sins were that these two brothers committed, but perhaps that might shed a little light on that may be some of what this Onan was guilty of. It denoted a bit of selfishness, didn't it? He's like, no, I ain't going to do that. I'll go into her, but ain't going to be my young'uns. I'm not going to raise up somebody else's young'uns for her. So, by this time, verse 11, then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow in your father's house till my son Shelah is grown. For he said, lest he also die like his brothers. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. So he has run out of marriage age boys. Apparently, it would appear that they haven't been taught. Judah himself, I think, was just based on what we read about him, that he was very, very marginally a believer. Now, we know that he knew who God was. We knew he was taught that. But I don't think he was taught the power and the greatness of God. And that was a thing that his daddy, Jacob, experienced live and in person, wasn't it? A couple of times. You remember when he was fleeing from Esau and he was sleeping on the ground, and then he had this vision of the stairway to heaven, angels coming up and down, God at the top. And then later on, when he left Laban and he came back, God appeared to him again, didn't he? And what did he tell him that time? What did he tell him with regards to foreign gods? Put them all away. Do away with all of the foreign gods and serve me. Tony?
Also goes back to him marrying that was really a big problem after Esau.
It was. I mean, Esau did that, and we saw how married from the Canaanites, and we saw how his mother and father felt about that. It distressed his mother tremendously. And then, I'm sure that it probably stressed Jacob. I'm sure it does. I'm sure it did. But yet, we see from Jacob's life and the things that's going on that it's pretty obvious that he did not spend the amount of time teaching his sons the way he should have. I mean, just look a few chapters before what they did at Shechem. And Jacob really didn't have anything much to say other than, why'd y'all do that? You're making me stink in the sight of these people. So, I think this is another classic case of the chickens coming home to roost. He did. He absolutely did. And that was the first thing he did. He run over and married the Canaanite woman and had these 3 sons. Becky?
I have a question.
All right.
It says that God killed him.
Yep.
Now, I know this is inspired and everything. Is there anything in any reference or that says how? Did he just drop? Did lightning strike him?
It didn't say. It didn't say.
There's nothing that
It just. I mean, it could have been that he just. Well, and when we get on over to Exodus and Leviticus and on those, there's a number of occasions where God's wrath was so much that he struck them down. Doesn't really say exactly how. Well, one of the times it does say how. The earth opened up and swallowed a bunch of them, several thousand.
I just wondered if there was anything that said, it said both that, that God
Yeah, it.
And
I didn't see anything specific as to how that happened.
apparently something happened because he was worried about the youngest son.
Yeah. Tony?
I was just gonna say, like you said, that Ananias and Sapphira, same thing,
Yeah.
I guess.
They just dropped dead.
Yeah, that in the early church.
Yeah. Well, you know, here's the thing. Where do we get our life from? God. And God is the sovereign. So he can take it just like he gave it, I reckon, can't he? And it could be that I think when the scripture talks about Judah finally becoming worried that his youngest son would meet the same fate, he had to see how his sons were living. He had to see their wickedness. And he had to know that that was not right. That's my opinion. And I think maybe that's why he was very concerned about his third son and his life. Maybe Judah thought he had a little time left that he could do something, or maybe he thought, well, she'll just forget and move on. But not so. So she's in her father's house. Now, in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died. Judah was comforted and went up to his sheep shearers at Timnah, he and his friend Hira the Adullamite. Now, what does that tell you about Judah, about his status, when it says that he went up to his sheep shearers? He had a bit of status, didn't he? You're right. He was the boss. He had his own flock. He had his own servants. He had his people that was doing the work for him. So he had a bit of status here, and that's going to be something that's important to keep in mind. In verse 13, and it was told Tamar, saying, "Look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep." So now she gets to thinking, opportunity is knocking. So she took off her widow's garments, covered herself with a veil, wrapped herself, and sat in an open place which was on the way to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown, and he was not given to him she was not given to him as a wife. So she's aggravated, ain't she? She's pretty put out about this whole thing now. He's supposed to be my husband, and you holding out on me. So, there absolutely was some time passed. Yeah, and we see this in several places there where that time is rolling on. So when Judah saw her, verse 15, when Judah saw her, he thought she was a harlot because she had covered her face. Then he turned to her by the way and said, "Please let me come in to you." For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. So she said, "What will you give me that you may come in to me?" So they're both going deep into it, ain't they? They're both going deep into sin, ain't they? So he says, "I will send a young goat from the flock." Now, it was pretty obvious that he didn't have a goat running alongside of him right then, did he? So she said, will you give me a pledge till you send it back? She needed some level of collateral. That's what we call that in modern day terms. We need to put up some surety, some collateral. That she was going to get paid for her deeds when make sure he comes back. So then he said, what pledge shall I give you? So she said, your signet and cord and your staff that is in your hand. And he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. So all of the things that he gave her were symbols of his status. It was thought that likely as not, the staff was not necessarily something that he used in his shepherding work, but it was more of a status thing. We're talking about the signet as well. That absolutely was. That was his. I guess in our modern day vernacular, his signet would be like like turning his driver's license over to her. It's a pretty big form of identification. So, we got them both. Well, quite frankly, we got them both playing the harlot now, don't we? So, verse 19. I kind of lost my place there for a minute. So she arose and went away and laid aside her veil and put on the garments of her widowhood. So she got what she wanted. She went back to being a widow now. Amazing. And Judah sent the young goat by the hand of his friend the Adullamite to receive his pledge from the woman's hand, but he didn't find her. She'd done moved on. She was not interested in the goat. She was interested in getting back at Judah, because he hadn't lived up to what he had told her before. I'm going to send my third son to you to be your husband, because the other two's dead. And he hadn't done it. And she wasn't happy. What is that other saying that we sometimes hear? Hell hath no fury like that of a woman scorned. I think we can see that right there, because she was scorned. Then he asked the men of the place, saying, where is the harlot who was openly by the roadside? And they said, there was no harlot in this place. Now, in my mind, that would be a bit of a uh-oh moment, wouldn't it? Like, uh-oh, what have I done now? So we returned to Judah and said, I cannot find her. Also, the men of the place said there was no harlot in this place. Then Judah said, let her take them for herself, lest we be shamed. For I sent this young woman a goat, and you have not found her. He said, I tried to do my part of this thing, and couldn't find her. So I'm clear now. Tony?
I'd like to know who's telling all these things.
So,
It doesn't say, I know.
no.
Somebody knew the story. There was no secrets there. And,
Yeah.
because, what was it back, somebody told, Tamar, something, and then right here,
Somebody told her that Judah was going by to shear his sheep. Yeah, so somebody's feeding her information and telling things. Don't really know who that is. Maybe it's a relative, friend, who knows. So It is. That's a fact. Gossip is there. So, Judah thought everything was fine. You know, he did his thing. You know, biggest thing he was out of was his identification things. I'll go get me another one. It's all right. Don't worry about it. It's all good. However, verse 24, and it came to pass about 3 months after that Judah was told, saying, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the harlot. Furthermore, she is with child by harlotry. So Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. He wasn't cutting no slack, was he? There was no opportunity for any kind of defense. There was no opportunity for any kind of investigation. It was just that, yep, somebody said she's being a harlot, so okay, that's good enough for me. Let's burn her. Do you reckon Judah might have thought that that was a good way to get rid of her too? So that somebody else could have his son? Could be. I don't know. But I think this speaks very vividly to a double standard, don't it? Now watch this. Not yet. Yeah, that's what we. That's what we fixing to see. So, verse 25. Verse 25. When she was brought out, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, by the man to whom these things belong, I am with child. She was pretty smart, wasn't she? She knew what was going to happen. She knew that she knew what her plan was. And she said, please determine whose these are, the signet and cord and staff. So watch this in what he says in verse 26. So Judah acknowledged them and said, she has been more righteous than I, because I did not give her to my son, or to Shelah, my son, and he never knew her again. All right, so that does not mean that he committed sin and she did not. That ain't what that means when it says she was more righteous than I. What it does say, though, is that his sin was more grievous, in his mind at least. I should have took care of her, but I did not. Now, when we talk about, this dual way of handling things, that's not the first time we see that, or not the only time we see that, is it? Where else do we see that same type of situation? Well, not exactly this. What I'm getting at, the one I'm thinking about, and I might should have asked that question a little differently. But you remember in the New Testament when they were trying to trick Jesus, that was the whole point of this thing, was we're going to trick him into saying something wrong. So they found a harlot and brought her, and they caught her and the man in the very act. So, we see the dual system of justice here is that even when Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned, there was nothing said about the guy that did that. Now, the last time I checked, it takes two. I don't think they've changed the way that's done. And not told me, but so, yeah. So we're seeing this dual system of justice. You're right, that is. It was such a point that she had no rights. She had nothing. Yeah. Yeah. Judah had to tell her to go back and stay there, which really, in reality, what he should have done is let her stay in his house, because that's kind of the way those things worked out back then. But we see this dual system of justice, and the same thing played out in the New Testament when they brought the woman to Jesus, and then they told me, yeah, she was caught right in the act of adultery. Now, what we gonna do with her? What do you think?
Where she's more righteous than he was is where, when it first came up, he should have rightfully stood up and said, "It's my ring, my staff."
And even before that, he should have done a better job of taking care of the widow that was in his house, that was the widow of not one but two of his sons. He should have treated her better, more kindly, but he did not. And I think that's kind of where the one good thing that you see there is that at least Judah has a conscience. At least Judah realized that he had done wrong. And that seemed to be lacking in his boys. So you remember what Jesus' words were to the religious leaders that tried to set him up and said, "Hey, we caught this woman in adultery, the very act. The Scripture says she needs to be stoned. What do you say? Let him without sin cast the first stone." Now, what Jesus could have said was, yep, that's what the law says, but now technically the law says that they both shall be stoned. But they didn't bother to mention that. They didn't bother to bring that up. Tony?
Another thing that we can get from this lesson is be sure that your sins will find you out.
Yep.
It may take a little while.
But it will.
They will.
But it will. You know, as we move on through this, in verse 27, it says, "Now it came to pass at the time for giving birth that, behold, twins were in the womb." Where have you seen that before? Jacob and Esau. And they were fighting in the womb. Poor Rebekah. And so it was, when she was giving birth, that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took a scarlet thread and bound it on his hand, saying, "This one came out first." Then it happened, he drew back in his hand. I guess he was not ready to be born yet. And his brother came out unexpectedly. And she said, "How did you break through? This breach be upon you." Therefore his name was called Perez. Afterwards his brother came out, who had the scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah. Which one of these two boys was in the lineage of Jesus? Perez. Perez would give way to the lineage Boaz, King David, and Jesus himself. And you know, you think about this too, and this absolutely shows to the point of how God can use things that we as humans think is just, this is awful. And God uses it to accomplish his purpose. So Boaz married who? Remember? Ruth? Was she an Israelite? No, she was not. As I remember, Rahab was in that mix too, wasn't she? Was she an Israelite? Nope. In fact, she was referred to as Rahab the harlot. Steve?
It just goes to show us over and over and over again, God uses people, sinners, bad sinners,
Yeah.
and says, hey, I can make good things happen out of bad things.
Yes. Yes.
But you have to
Absolutely.
trust in me.
Absolutely that. And you know, that is such a wonderful thing about the God we serve, isn't it? That he can take the worst possible things and turn something good out of it. Paul is quite the example of that. You remember when he was Saul of Tarsus, his number one goal in life was to see how many Christians he could kill, right? And then look what happened on that road to Damascus when Jesus appeared to Saul. He turned 180 degrees and became who we know as the great apostle Paul, who wrote quite a lot of the New Testament as we know it, a lot of the letters. So I think that's really one of the number one things that we take away from this right now. God can do all things. God can take the worst situation and make things work out for good. In fact, he says in his word that he can make all things work for good to those that love him. So, okay. Possibly he could have. I think what we see, I think part of what we saw here is perhaps because he went into her the way he did, that he wasn't having anything to do with her anymore. Now it is possible. I hadn't really looked at the kind of the laws and customs they had to that extent yet, but it is possible. I mean, plenty of the other stuff that they did we see is like just weird to us, But the other thing we see here too is that it does matter how your children are raised, don't it? It matters what goes on in your family. It matters how much you study. It matters how much you teach your children about God. It matters how you live. It looks like that our time has pretty much about expired. Next week, we'll be in chapter 39. We're going back to Joseph.